The black Mercedes pulled up to the back entrance of the Harrington Music Hall at exactly 2:47 p.m. David Chen stepped out, adjusting his expensive watch and smoothing down his tailored suit jacket. He was running late for one of the most important meetings of his career, and he hated being late. David was 42 years old and had spent the last 15 years building his reputation as one of the city's most respected piano instructors and music conservatory directors. He'd trained dozens of successful musicians, written 2 books on classical piano technique, and performed at concert halls across 3 continents. His students came from the wealthiest families in the city, kids who'd been playing since they were 4 years old, who had grand pianos in their living rooms and private tutors for every subject imaginable. He grabbed his leather briefcase from the passenger seat and slammed the car door, his mind already racing through the numbers he'd need to present to the board. The conservatory needed funding. Big funding. And today's donor meeting could make or break their entire year. That's when he nearly tripped over her. "Watch it," David snapped, catching himself against the brick wall. Sitting on the ground, her back pressed against the building, was a teenage girl. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a faded blue hoodie that had seen better days. Next to her sat a worn backpack with patches sewn over holes, and in front of her, propped up on her knees, was a piece of cardboard with words written in careful black marker. "Future pianist. Any help appreciated?" David stared at the sign for a moment, then let out a short laugh. Not a kind laugh. The kind of laugh that says he found something absurd, maybe even a little insulting. "A pianist?" he said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You want to be a pianist?" The girl looked up at him. Her eyes were brown, clear, and surprisingly calm. She didn't look embarrassed or defensive. She just looked at him like she was used to this kind of reaction. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. David shook his head, glancing at his watch again. He really didn't have time for this. But something about her sign irritated him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Maybe it was the word future written with such confidence. Maybe it was the whole idea that someone sitting on the street thought they could just decide to become a pianist. As if it were that simple. "You realize," he said, his tone sharp, "that becoming a pianist requires an actual piano, right? And not just any piano. You need years of training, daily practice, private lessons that cost hundreds of dollars per session. You need music theory, performance experience, connections in the industry." The girl's expression didn't change. "I practice every day at the public library," she said. "They have a keyboard in the community room. I go there when they open and stay until they close." David almost laughed again. A keyboard at the public library. A cheap electronic keyboard, probably, with plastic keys that didn't even respond like real piano keys. The kind of thing a child might get for Christmas and abandon by February. "That's not real practice," he said, his voice getting harder. "Real musicianship requires discipline. It requires resources. It requires opportunities that—" He paused, gesturing vaguely at her worn clothes and the backpack and the cardboard sign, "that you're never going to have access to. I'm sorry, but that's just reality." The girl didn't argue with him. She just nodded slowly, like she'd heard this before. Like she'd heard it 100 times and had learned there was no point in fighting it. David felt a small pang of something. Guilt, maybe. But he pushed it away. He was just being honest. The world of classical music was brutal and competitive. It wasn't for people who practiced on library keyboards. It was for the kids whose parents could afford the best of everything, who started young and never had to worry about anything except perfecting their technique. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, fishing out a $5 bill. He held it out to her, more to ease his own conscience than out of any real generosity. "Here," he said, "get yourself something to eat." The girl took the money, her fingers thin and calloused. "Thank you," she said, her voice still quiet but steady. David turned away, heading toward the heavy glass doors of the music hall's back entrance. He could feel her eyes on him as he walked, but he didn't look back. He had a meeting to get to, a meeting that actually mattered. He pulled open the door and stepped into the cool, quiet hallway of the music hall. The walls were lined with photographs of famous performers who'd played there over the decades. The carpet was thick and expensive. Everything about the place screamed prestige and excellence. This was his world. This was where real musicians belonged. Outside on the other side of that door, the girl sat very still for a moment. Her name was Lily Rodriguez, though David hadn't bothered to ask. She folded the $5 bill carefully and tucked it into her pocket, then picked up her cardboard sign and studied the words she'd written. Future pianist. She'd been homeless for 8 months now, ever since her mom died. Cancer, fast and cruel. Taking everything they had for treatments that didn't work. Lily had bounced between a few temporary places after that. A distant cousin's couch, a friend's garage, a youth shelter that was always full. Eventually, she ended up here on the streets trying to figure out how to survive while holding on to the one thing her mother had always told her. Don't let go of your dreams, baby. No matter what happens, don't let them go. Her mother had been a musician once, a long time ago. She'd played piano at a small church and sometimes at weddings, nothing fancy, but she'd loved it. She'd taught Lily everything she knew before the sickness came. They'd never been able to afford a real piano, but they'd had an old keyboard, and they'd practiced together every evening in their tiny apartment. When her mom died, Lily lost the apartment, the keyboard, and almost everything else. But she hadn't lost the music. She couldn't explain it to people like that man in the expensive suit, but the music was still inside her. It was the only thing that made sense anymore, the only thing that felt like home. She packed up her sign and shouldered her backpack. It was getting late in the afternoon, and she wanted to get to the library before it closed. They had evening hours on Tuesdays, which meant she could practice for another few hours before she had to figure out where she'd sleep tonight. As she walked away from the music hall, she passed by a side window. Through it, she could just barely hear the sound of someone practicing scales, the notes floating out into the street. She stopped for a moment, closing her eyes, letting the music wash over her. Her fingers moved unconsciously, pressing against invisible keys, following along with the melody only she could hear in her head. She didn't notice David standing at a window 3 stories above, looking down at the street, already forgetting about the homeless girl with the impossible dream. He had bigger things to worry about, but in a few hours everything was about to change in ways neither of them could possibly imagine. David rushed through the marble hallway, his footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. He was already 10 minutes late, and the board members didn't appreciate tardiness. He pushed open the heavy wooden doors to the conference room and stepped inside, forcing his best professional smile. "Gentlemen, ladies, my apologies for the delay," he said, setting his briefcase on the polished mahogany table. The room was filled with some of the wealthiest people in the city. Board members, potential donors, trustees of the Wellington Foundation. They were the kind of people who wrote checks with more zeros than most people saw in a year. And today, David needed them more than ever. The meeting dragged on for nearly 2 hours. David presented his vision for the conservatory's scholarship program, showed them spreadsheets and projections, talked about the talented young musicians they could help develop. The Wellington Foundation representatives nodded politely, asked their questions, and promised to make their final decision after tonight's fundraising gala. Tonight. Everything hinged on tonight. The gala was supposed to showcase the conservatory's best talent. The plan was simple. Their star student, a brilliant 18-year-old named Timothy who'd already won 3 international competitions, would perform. He'd play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces ever written. The performance would wow the donors, prove the conservatory's worth, and secure the $2 million endowment they desperately needed. $2 million. Enough to fund scholarships for dozens of students over the next 5 years. Enough to upgrade their facilities, hire better instructors, and establish the conservatory as one of the premier music schools on the East Coast. As the meeting wrapped up and the board members filed out, David felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw 3 missed calls from his assistant director, Patricia. That wasn't normal. Patricia never called during board meetings unless something was seriously wrong. He stepped into the hallway and called her back. "David, thank God." Patricia's voice came through, tight with stress. "We have a major problem." David's stomach dropped. "What kind of problem?" "It's Timothy. He's in the hospital." The world seemed to tilt sideways for a moment. What happened? Food poisoning, they think. He's been violently ill all day. I just spoke with his parents. There's no way he can perform tonight. The doctor said he needs at least 48 hours of rest, maybe longer. David leaned against the wall, his mind racing. Okay, we'll figure this out. Call Rebecca, she can do it. Rebecca's in Boston for her grandmother's funeral, remember? She left yesterday. Right, okay. What about Kevin? Kevin's got the flu. He's been out all week. David started walking quickly toward his office, his phone pressed to his ear. Amanda, then. She knows the Chopin pieces backward and forward. There was a pause on the other end. David, Amanda's at a competition in Chicago. She won't be back until Thursday. You're telling me we don't have a single advanced student available? Not one who's prepared to perform at this level on 3 hours' notice, Patricia said, her voice cracking slightly. I've called everyone. They're either out of town, sick, or not ready for something this important. David, the Wellington Foundation people are expecting a world-class performance tonight. If we cancel or put someone unprepared on that stage. She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what would happen. The foundation would pull out. The $2 million would disappear. And with it, any hope of expanding the scholarship program. David reached his office and slammed the door behind him. He dropped into his chair and stared at the ceiling, his mind spinning through possibilities. There had to be someone. There had to be a solution. What about the faculty? He asked, grasping at straws. I could perform. You haven't performed publicly in 3 years, Patricia said gently. And besides, the whole point is to showcase student talent. That's what the foundation wants to see. They want to know their money is developing the next generation of musicians. David knew she was right. He put his head in his hands, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on him. 15 years of building this program, and it was all going to fall apart because of bad timing and bad luck. Keep trying, he said finally. Call every student again. Check if anyone's situation has changed. I'll be in the concert hall. He hung up and sat in silence for a long moment. Then he stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed down to the main concert hall. Maybe being in the space would help him think. Maybe inspiration would strike. The hall was empty and dark except for the work lights on stage. David walked down the center aisle, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He climbed the stairs to the stage and stood at the edge, looking out at the hundreds of empty seats. Tonight, those seats would be filled with the city's elite. People who expected excellence, people who had no patience for excuses or disappointments, people who held the conservatory's future in their checkbooks. He walked to the grand piano sitting center stage, a gorgeous Steinway worth more than most people's cars. He sat down on the bench and lifted the fallboard, exposing the keys. They gleamed under the stage lights, perfectly maintained, perfectly tuned. David played a few notes, then a scale, then the opening bars of the piece Timothy was supposed to perform tonight. His fingers moved automatically, muscle memory from decades of practice. But his heart wasn't in it. His heart was too busy racing with panic. What was he going to do? He stopped playing and just sat there staring at the keys. From somewhere in the building he could hear the faint sound of other students practicing, their music drifting through the walls and hallways. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds, the sounds of a conservatory on an ordinary day. But this wasn't an ordinary day. A knock on the stage door made him look up. Patricia stepped through, carrying a tablet and looking apologetic. Any luck? David asked, though he could already tell from her expression. She shook down her head. I've exhausted every option. Everyone's either unavailable or not prepared for this level of performance. David, I don't know what else to do. David stood up from the piano bench and walked to the edge of the stage. He looked out at those empty seats again, imagining them filled with disappointed faces, imagining having to stand up there tonight and announce that there would be no performance, imagining watching $2 million and 5 years of planning disappear. There has to be someone, he said, more to himself than to Patricia. In a city this size with this many musicians, there has to be someone who can do this. Patricia climbed the stairs to join him on stage. She was quiet for a moment, then cleared her throat nervously. David, I might have an idea, but you're probably going to think I'm crazy. He turned to look at her. At this point, I'll listen to anything. She hesitated, seeming to choose her words carefully. You remember that girl outside earlier? The one with the sign? David frowned, confused. The homeless kid? What about her? I've seen her before, at the public library on 5th Street. I volunteer there sometimes, shelving books. Patricia took a breath. David, I've watched her practice on that old keyboard in the community room. And I'm telling you, she's talented, really talented. David stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to put a homeless teenager who practices on a library keyboard on stage at our most important fundraising gala of the year? In front of the Wellington Foundation? I know how it sounds, Patricia said quickly. But David, we're out of options. And I'm serious about her ability. She's there every single day, sometimes for 6 or 7 hours. She plays classical pieces, complicated ones, and she plays them well. David turned away, shaking his head. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. But as he stood there staring at that empty concert hall, a desperate thought crept into his mind. What if Patricia was right? David paced back and forth across the stage, his hand rubbing his temples. Every logical part of his brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. But the desperate part, the part that was watching 15 years of work about to crumble, was actually considering it. Where is she now? He heard himself ask. Patricia's eyes widened slightly, surprised that he was even entertaining the thought. I don't know. She's usually at the library by this time, but I saw her outside earlier, so maybe she's still around. David checked his watch. It was just after 5 o'clock. The gala started at 8. That gave them less than 3 hours. 3 hours to find this girl, listen to her play, and somehow turn her into a performer, worthy of standing on this stage in front of the city's most influential people. It was impossible. It was completely, utterly impossible. Find her, David said, the words coming out before he could stop them. If she can't play, we're no worse off than we are right now. But I need to hear her myself. Patricia nodded and practically ran off the stage, pulling out her phone as she went. David stood alone in the concert hall, wondering if desperation had finally made him lose his mind completely. 20 minutes later, Patricia returned through the back entrance. And behind her, looking small and uncertain, was the girl from earlier. Lily. She still wore the same faded hoodie, still carried the same worn backpack, but now her eyes were wide and confused, darting around the grand hallway like she couldn't quite believe where she was. David walked toward them, trying to keep his expression neutral. Up close, he could see that Lily was younger than he'd first thought. Maybe 15 or 16 at most. Her clothes were clean but worn thin, and there was a tiredness in her face that no teenager should have. You told Patricia you practiced piano, David said, skipping any pleasantries. He didn't have time for small talk. Lily nodded, her hands gripping the straps of her backpack. Yes, sir. Every day. On a keyboard at the library. Yes, sir. David crossed his arms. What do you practice? What pieces? Lily swallowed, seeming nervous but not backing down. I've been working on Chopin lately. The Nocturnes. And some Beethoven. The Moonlight Sonata. Also some Mozart, but I like the romantic composers better. They feel more... She paused, searching for the word. More emotional, I guess. Despite himself, David was slightly impressed. Those weren't simple pieces. They required real skill, real understanding of dynamics and feeling, but knowing about them and being able to play them were two very different things. Come with me, he said, turning and walking toward one of the practice rooms off the main hallway. He didn't look back to see if she was following. He could hear her footsteps behind him, quick and light. The practice room was small, with soundproof walls and a baby grand piano in the center. It wasn't as magnificent as the Steinway on the main stage, but it was still a real piano. An expensive, well-maintained instrument that probably cost more than everything Lily owned in the world. David gestured toward the piano bench. Sit. Lily hesitated for just a moment, then carefully set down her backpack and moved to the bench. She sat down slowly, like she was afraid she might break something. Her hands hovered over the keys, not quite touching them yet. David leaned against the wall, his arms still crossed, his expression cold and evaluating. He was already planning what he'd say when she inevitably failed this audition. He'd be kind about it, maybe give her some money, send her on her way. Then he'd go back to panicking about the gala. Play something, he said. Whatever you want. Show me what you can do. Lily took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the keys. David noticed her fingers were thin, the nails cut short and uneven. Working hands. Hands that had probably never had a professional manicure or worn expensive rings. She closed her eyes for a moment and something in her expression changed. The nervousness seemed to fade away, replaced by something else. Something focused and far away at the same time. Then she started to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the small room, and David felt his breath catch in his chest. Her technique wasn't perfect. He could see that immediately. Her posture needed work. Her fingering wasn't always textbook. There were small hesitations in places where a trained pianist would flow smoothly, but none of that mattered because of what she was doing with the music itself. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was feeling them. Every phrase had emotion behind it. Every dynamic change meant something. When the melody soared, you could hear longing in it. When it fell, you could hear sadness. This wasn't the playing of someone who'd learned from a book or copied from a recording. This was the playing of someone who understood what the composer was trying to say, who had lived through enough pain and hope to recognize it in the music. David found himself standing up straighter, leaning forward slightly. His arms had uncrossed without him realizing it. He watched Lily's face as she played, her eyes still closed, completely lost in the piece. There was a small smile on her lips, peaceful and genuine. The music swelled and fell, moving through the nocturne's gentle waves of melody. In that moment, David forgot about the gala, forgot about the $2 million, forgot about everything except the sound filling the room. It had been years since music had affected him like this. Years since he'd heard something that made him remember why he'd fallen in love with piano in the first place. Lily played the final notes, letting them fade into silence. Then she opened her eyes and looked up at David, waiting for his reaction. David couldn't speak for a moment. He just stood there, staring at this homeless teenager who had somehow managed to move him more in 3 minutes than his prize students had in years. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he finally asked, his voice quieter than before. "My mom taught me," Lily said softly. "She was a musician. Not famous or anything, just she played at our church and at weddings sometimes. We couldn't afford lessons, but she showed me everything she knew. And then I just kept practicing after she—" Lily's voice trailed off. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. David pulled over a chair and sat down, facing her. His mind was racing now, but in a different way than before. This wasn't panic anymore. This was possibility. "Your technique needs work," he said, and Lily's face fell slightly. "But what you have, what you just showed me, that can't be taught. Do you understand what I'm saying? Most of my students have perfect technique. They can play every note exactly right, but they don't make people feel anything. You make people feel." Lily looked confused. "Is that good?" "It's everything," David said. He stood up and started pacing, his professor mind already working through logistics and problems and solutions. "Listen to me carefully. Tonight, in less than 3 hours, we have a fundraising gala. Very important people will be here. We were supposed to have a student perform, but he's sick. We need someone to take his place." Lily's eyes went wide. "You mean me?" "I'm considering it," David said. "But I need to be honest with you about what this means. If you get on that stage and you're not ready, if you make mistakes or freeze up or can't handle the pressure, it won't just embarrass you. It will hurt this conservatory and every student who depends on the funding we're trying to get tonight." "I understand," Lily said quietly. David studied her face. She looked scared, but there was something else there too. Determination. Hope. The kind of fierce hope that comes from having nothing left to lose. "If we do this," David continued, "the next 2.5 hours are going to be the hardest work you've ever done. I'm going to push you. I'm going to criticize you. I'm going to make you play the same measures over and over until you get them right. And there's no guarantee it will work. There's a very real chance you'll fail." Lily stood up from the piano bench. She looked David straight in the eye, and when she spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "Mr. Chen," she said, "I've been failing at everything for 8 months. I've failed at finding a place to live. I've failed at keeping myself fed. I've failed at being a normal kid with a normal life. The only thing I haven't failed at is music. So if you're willing to give me this chance, I promise you I won't waste it." David felt something shift in his chest. He'd been wrong about this girl. Completely wrong. She wasn't just some homeless kid with a fantasy. She was a fighter, a survivor, someone who'd been knocked down by life and kept getting back up. He walked to the door and called out to Patricia, who'd been waiting in the hallway. Clear my schedule, he said, and find someone to get this girl some proper concert clothes. We have a performance to prepare for. Patricia's face broke into a huge smile. Really? You're going to do it? David looked back at Lily, who was still standing by the piano, her hands clasped together, hope written all over her face. Yeah, he said, we're going to do it. The next 2 hours were unlike anything Lily had ever experienced in her life. David brought her back to the practice room and closed the door. He pulled up a chair right next to the piano bench and opened a worn piece of sheet music, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Just looking at the pages made Lily's heart race. She'd heard this piece before, had even tried to learn parts of it on the library keyboard, but she'd never imagined performing it in front of anyone. Do you know this piece? David asked. I know the beginning, Lily admitted, and some of the second movement, but I've never played the whole thing through. David nodded, his expression serious. We don't have time to learn the entire concerto. We're going to focus on the first movement, the opening section specifically. It's the most recognizable part, and if you can nail it, that's all we need for tonight. He sat down beside her on the bench, which was a little awkward because it wasn't really meant for 2 people, but Lily didn't dare complain. David played through the opening measures, his fingers moving with practiced precision across the keys. The famous opening chords rang out, powerful and dramatic, filling the small room. This piece requires strength, David said. Rachmaninoff had huge hands and he wrote music that demands power. But it also requires incredible delicacy. You have to be able to go from thunder to whisper in a single phrase. Show me what you can do with just these first 8 measures. Lily positioned her hands and began to play. She made it through 4 measures before David stopped her. No, your wrist is too stiff, look. He demonstrated, his hand flowing naturally with the movement of the keys. The power comes from your whole arm, not just your fingers. Try again, Lily tried again. This time she made it through 6 measures. Better, but you're rushing. Rachmaninoff is emotional, yes, but he's also precise. Each note needs space to breathe, again, and so it went. Over and over, David stopped her, corrected her, made her repeat the same phrases until her hands cramped and her back ached from tension. He was relentless, catching every small mistake, every missed dynamic, every place where her timing faltered. No, again. Watch your pedal work, again. You're getting sloppy. Focus, again. There were moments when Lily wanted to cry from frustration. Her fingers felt clumsy and stupid. Every time she thought she'd gotten something right, David would point out 3 more things that were wrong. She'd been so confident after playing the Chopin piece, but now she felt like a complete beginner. But David's face, stern as it was, never showed disappointment. He showed impatience sometimes, yes, but not disappointment. Every time he corrected her, he also showed her exactly how to fix it. And slowly, painfully, the piece started to come together. About an hour into their practice, Patricia knocked on the door. She came in carrying a garment bag and a shoebox. I called in some favors, she said to Lily with a warm smile. The clothing should fit. There's a bathroom down the hall where you can change. Lily looked at David, who nodded. Take 10 minutes. We all need a break. In the bathroom, Lily unzipped the garment bag and gasped. Inside was a beautiful black dress, simple but elegant, the kind of thing she'd only ever seen in store windows. The fabric felt soft and expensive under her fingers. There was also a pair of black flats in the shoebox, and though they were a little big, they were far nicer than the worn sneakers she'd been wearing. She changed quickly, almost afraid to look at herself in the mirror. When she finally did, she barely recognized the girl staring back. The dress fit well, falling just below her knees. With her hair pulled back, she almost looked like she belonged in a place like this. Almost. When she returned to the practice room, both David and Patricia looked up. Patricia's eyes got a little watery. You look perfect, Patricia said softly. David just nodded once, all business. Good, let's get back to work. We've wasted enough time. But Lily caught something in his eyes, a brief flicker of approval, before his serious expression returned. They dove back into practice with renewed intensity. David moved from the piano bench to standing behind her, watching her hands, her posture, everything. He was like a hawk, catching every tiny flaw. You're hunching your shoulders. Sit up straight. Don't look at your hands so much. Trust your muscle memory. That chord needs to ring out longer. Feel it before you move on. With 45 minutes left before the gala, David made her play through the entire section without stopping. Lily's hands were shaking from exhaustion and nerves, but she pushed through. When she finished, she sat back, breathing hard, waiting for David's verdict. He was quiet for a long moment, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "It's not perfect," he finally said. "Your technique is still rough in places. You're going to make mistakes out there." Lily's heart sank. "But," David continued, and his voice softened just slightly, "you understand this music. You feel it. And that matters more than perfect technique." He paused. "I've trained hundreds of students. Most of them could play this piece with flawless precision. But very few of them could make it mean something. You make it mean something." Lily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back quickly. "Thank you," she whispered. David pulled up a chair and sat facing her. "Now we need to talk about what happens when you walk onto that stage. There will be at least 300 people in that audience. Wealthy people, important people, people who are used to seeing the best of the best. Some of them are going to look at you and wonder what you're doing there. Some of them might even be hostile to the idea of a young performer they've never heard of. You're not exactly selling this," Lily said, attempting a small joke. The corner of David's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "I need you to understand what you're walking into. But I also need you to understand something else. Once you start playing, none of that matters. Once your hands touch those keys, the only thing that exists is you and the music. Not the audience, not the donors, not the money or the pressure or any of it. Just the music. Can you do that?" Lily thought about all the nights she'd spent on the street, when everything felt hopeless and scary. The only thing that had kept her going was music. Playing it in her mind, remembering the way her mother's hands had moved across the keys, imagining herself at a real piano someday. Music had been her escape, her hope, her home when she had none. "Yes," she said firmly, "I can do that." David stood up and extended his hand to her. "Then let's go meet the audience." As they walked through the hallways toward the main concert hall, Lily could hear the sound of voices and laughter. The gala guests were arriving, filling up the lobby. Through a side window, she caught glimpses of them. Women in evening gowns and sparkling jewelry, men in expensive tuxedos, everyone looking polished and perfect. Her hands started shaking again. This was really happening. In just a few minutes, she was going to walk onto a stage in front of all these people and perform one of the most difficult piano pieces ever written. Patricia appeared beside them, carrying a small makeup kit. "Just a little powder so you don't shine under the lights," she said, gently dabbing at Lily's face. "You're going to be wonderful." "I know it." David checked his watch. 15 minutes. Come with me." He led Lily to a small room just off the stage. Through the heavy curtain, they could hear the audience settling into their seats. The rustle of programs, the murmur of conversation. David turned to face her. "I'm going to go out and introduce you. When I call your name, you walk through that curtain, straight to the piano. Don't look at the audience. Just look at the piano. Sit down, take a breath, and begin, okay?" Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. "One more thing," David said, and his tone was different now, gentler. "No matter what happens out there, you've already proven something important tonight. You've proven that you have real talent, that you're willing to work hard, that you don't give up." He paused. "Your mother would be very proud of you." The tears came then, and Lily couldn't stop them. David handed her a tissue, looking slightly uncomfortable but not unkind. "Pull yourself together," he said, but there was no harshness in it. "You have a performance to give." Lily wiped her eyes and took several deep breaths. Through the curtain, she heard the audience grow quiet. Then she heard David's footsteps as he walked onto the stage. His voice came through clearly, amplified by the hall's perfect acoustics. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight for what I promise will be a very special performance." Lily's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. Everything she'd dreamed about. Everything she'd worked for. Everything her mother had taught her. It all came down to the next few minutes. She heard David continue speaking, telling her story in brief, careful words. A young woman with extraordinary talent, unusual circumstances, a reminder of why arts education and scholarships matter. Then she heard her name. "Please welcome to the stage, Lily Rodriguez." The curtain was right in front of her. All she had to do was walk through it. Lily closed her eyes for just a moment, thought of her mother, thought of every hour she'd spent at that library keyboard, thought of the music that had saved her life. Then she stepped through the curtain and into the light. The lights were blinding. That was Lily's first thought as she stepped onto the stage. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but she'd never imagined how bright everything would be, how the stage lights would make it almost impossible to see the faces in the audience. Maybe that was a blessing. She could feel them, though. 300 pairs of eyes watching her walk across the stage. 300 people in designer clothes and expensive jewelry, wondering who this girl was and why she was here instead of the conservatory's famous students they'd come to see. Remember what David said? Don't look at them. Just look at the piano. The Steinway sat center stage, gleaming black under the lights, more beautiful than any instrument she'd ever seen. Lily walked toward it, her borrowed shoes quiet on the polished wood floor. Each step felt like it took forever. She was aware of how she must look to them, this thin girl in a borrowed dress walking onto one of the most prestigious stages in the city. She reached the piano bench and sat down carefully. The audience was silent now, waiting. Through the lights, she could just barely make out David standing in the wings, his arms crossed, his expression serious. He gave her the smallest nod. You can do this. You've practiced. You know this music. Just breathe. Lily placed her hands on the keys. They felt cool and smooth under her fingers. Real ivory, not the plastic keys of the library keyboard. She could feel the weight of them, the perfect balance, the way they responded to even the lightest touch. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, just like David had taught her. In that moment, the audience disappeared. The pressure disappeared. Even the stage itself seemed to fade away. There was only the piano, the music, and the memory of her mother's voice. When you play, baby, you're telling a story. Make them feel it. Lily opened her eyes and began to play. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the concert hall, powerful and dramatic. Her hands moved across the keys with surprising confidence, muscle memory taking over. The first few measures were strong, exactly as she'd practiced them. But then, in the fourth measure, her fingers slipped. A wrong note rang out, jarring and obvious. Lily's heart jumped into her throat. She'd made a mistake. Already. Not even 30 seconds in, and she'd already messed up in front of all these people. For a split second, she wanted to stop, to run off the stage and disappear. But David's voice echoed in her head from their practice session. If you make a mistake, don't stop. Never stop. Just keep going. The audience will forget the mistakes if the rest is beautiful. So Lily kept playing. She pushed through the mistake, her fingers finding their way back to the correct notes. The melody continued, rising and falling, and slowly, the tension in her shoulders began to ease. She stopped thinking about the audience. Stopped thinking about the Wellington Foundation and their $2 million. Stopped thinking about David watching from the wings or the fact that she was homeless or any of it. She just played. And something magical started to happen. The music began to flow through her instead of from her. Her hands moved almost on their own, finding the keys without her having to think about it. The dynamics came naturally. The loud parts powerful, the soft parts delicate and tender. She wasn't just playing the notes anymore. She was living inside the music, feeling every emotion that Rachmaninoff had poured into this piece more than 100 years ago. The longing, the hope, the sadness, and the joy all mixed together. Every night she'd spent cold and scared on the street, every memory of her mother, every moment of practicing at the library while other kids her age were at home with their families. All of it poured out through her fingers into the music. This wasn't a perfect performance. Her technique was still rough in places, but it was real. It was honest. It was everything she had. In the audience, people had stopped shuffling in their seats. The usual concert hall sounds, the quiet coughs, the rustling programs, the whispers, had all ceased. Everyone was listening, really listening. David stood in the wings, his hand covering his mouth, his eyes fixed on Lily. He'd been teaching music for 20 years, had heard countless performances by talented students. But this was different. This girl, who had every reason to be bitter and broken, was creating something beautiful. Something that made his chest tight and his eyes sting. The piece moved through its emotional journey, and Lily moved with it. Her whole body swayed slightly with the music, lost in the story she was telling. When the melody soared, you could hear hope in every note. When it fell, you could hear the pain of loss. In the third row, a woman in a pearl necklace who'd come to the gala more out of obligation than interest found tears running down her cheeks. She didn't quite understand why. She didn't know this girl's story. But something in the music spoke to her own losses, her own struggles that she never talked about because people in her position weren't supposed to struggle. Near the back, one of the Wellington Foundation board members leaned forward in his seat, completely absorbed. He'd been skeptical when David had introduced this unknown performer. But now he understood what he was witnessing. This wasn't just technical skill. This was artistry. This was why music mattered. Lily played on, unaware of any of this. She was in her own world now, a world where she wasn't homeless or alone or afraid, a world where she was home, sitting next to her mother at their old keyboard, playing music just because it made them happy. The piece built toward its climax, the notes cascading faster and more urgent. Lily's hands flew across the keys, and for a moment she was purely, completely free from worry, from fear, from the weight of everything she'd lost. There was only this moment, this music, this feeling, and then almost too soon, it was over. Lily played the final chord and let it ring out, sustaining the pedal, letting the sound fill every corner of the concert hall. She kept her hands on the keys even after the sound had faded to silence, not quite ready to leave the world the music had created. The silence stretched on. 1 second. 2 seconds, 3. Lily's heart sank. Was it that bad? Had she failed? She finally looked up, trying to see through the bright lights to the audience beyond. And then the applause started. It began with one person, then another. Then suddenly the entire audience was on their feet. The sound was like thunder, filling the hall, echoing off the walls. People were clapping, some were cheering, and more than a few were wiping tears from their eyes. Lily sat frozen at the piano, unable to process what was happening. They were standing up, for her. All these important, wealthy people were standing and applauding like she'd just given the performance of a lifetime. David walked out onto the stage, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. He reached Lily and helped her stand up, guiding her to the front of the stage. "Bow," he whispered. "They're applauding for you." Lily bowed, her legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. When she straightened up, she saw faces in the audience now. Real people. And they were smiling at her. Not with pity or judgment, but with genuine appreciation, with joy. The applause continued for almost 2 full minutes. Finally, as it began to fade, David led Lily off the stage. The moment they were behind the curtain, her knees buckled. Patricia was there instantly, catching her, holding her up. "You did it," Patricia said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Oh, honey, you did it." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The Wellington Foundation representatives found David immediately. Not only were they committing to the full $2 million endowment, but they wanted to create an additional scholarship fund specifically for students from challenging backgrounds. They wanted Lily to be the first recipient. More than that, several audience members approached with offers of help. A woman who owned a real estate company offered to help find Lily proper housing. A retired music teacher offered free lessons. A local news reporter wanted to do a story about her. Everyone wanted to help, to be part of her journey. 3 months later, Lily stood in her new bedroom, her own room, in a small apartment provided by one of the gala donors, and looked at the small upright piano that now stood against the wall. It wasn't a Steinway, but it was hers, really hers. She'd started classes at the conservatory the week before, on a full scholarship that covered everything she needed. She was the youngest student in most of her classes, but she was keeping up. More than keeping up, actually. She was thriving. David had become more than a teacher. He'd helped her navigate the complex process of becoming an emancipated minor, had connected her with a social worker who actually cared, had made sure she had everything she needed not just to survive, but to build a real life. On her desk, next to her new sheet music, sat the old cardboard sign she'd made months ago, "Future Pianist." She'd kept it as a reminder of where she'd come from, of how close she'd come to giving up on her dream. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Practice room 3, tomorrow at 9 a.m. We're starting Beethoven's Tempest Sonata." "Don't be late," Lily smiled. David was still tough, still demanding, still pushing her to be better. But now she understood it came from a place of respect. He believed in her, really believed in her. She sat down at her piano and began to play, just for herself, just for the joy of it. The music filled her small apartment, and for the first time in almost a year, Lily felt completely, truly home. Outside her window, the city moved on with its